So feedback, thoughts.
Generally it's fine. It's interesting. Like, I guess the game specifies that you use the Warlord Frigates box specifically, because that makes a huge difference.
Right.
I imagine.
Yeah,
if you had a tighter box.
Yeah, the intention here was like, could you make terrain out of sprues, obviously oil rigs, and could you use the box? Well, once I got the idea of dropping dice, I was like, well, obviously it uses the box.
Because you totally need a box, because otherwise you would never hit anything.
Yeah, and this is a good size for it. It's fine, and it's jolly. Jolly that it's a one box war game and you use like every part of it.
There's a gap around it so that some missing is possible, but there's a reasonable chance of things bouncing.
I think the interesting thing is that the difference in size just feels too stark. I think the frigate card probably gets a bit smaller. I'm not that worried about the brig being as big as it is, but I think the
because I certainly
gets a bit smaller.
I certainly seem to have the worst luck of the bounce in the first part of the game. Like, there was one where I completely missed.
Yeah. I wonder whether it's different on like these lovely rubberized mouse mat tables.
If you're playing on like a hard Formica table and the dice just ping out the box completely. Obviously, given that in boarding you can have more dice than any shooting.
Yeah.
Like, that a brig can board with 14 dice, and in theory a frigate can board with 29 dice if you get lucky enough.
Which is actually a reason to reintroduce or not remove that, like, you have to spend a card to activate the boarding, because although it's a card out of your hand, it is in essence to get the most powerful game effect.
Yeah, it's tricky, because it's like draining your hand so that you have fewer activations does feel painful, because it takes away your agency.
But then so is being on the receiving end of 28 dice.
But when you realise potentially how powerful what you get for it is, then that sort of... My fear is that it's just like 7 move cards, please. I'd stuff the shooting thing.
That's absolutely a worry.
I just want to, because between the boarding collision and the 14 to 20 something dice, where you're basically like, in theory, a frigate can roll in with 33 dice in a single boarding action.
And like, there is definitely a simple fix for just like, okay, you just get half that many dice, or no, I mean, I do like bidding. I do like that the bid changes the amount of dice you roll, and it does just feel like it rolls twice as many dice as shooting does, and so either shooting rolls twice as many dice, but it's just more fiddling about, or you get 1 for every 2 you bid.
I suppose the tricky thing, and the thing that is your sort of like, well, it's a silly jolly gas anti game, is that it's not that boarding is so powerful, it's that because you can take a hairpin, the ability to smash into somebody, it's like no ship should be able to do a hairpin, like in any kind of reality of movement, you know what I mean? And so my point is that, like, the idea of like 2 ships being like this and that one boarding, ramming and boarding that one, in like the reality of the way that ships move, feels a bit like, no, you couldn't. But because Gassan's templates are designed to represent the movement of cars, you have hairpins and things like that.
Well, I mean, a hairpin isn't an unreasonable way of representing attack. So I disagree that ships can't move like that. What doesn't feel quite right is like the fact that I get because the fact that I can like move alongside and smash it, like a boarding action, like this sort of collision thing. It feels like unless I'm at speed 5 and I'm like really hammering along, like, I mean, it might just be that collisions just aren't relevant, because like sailing ships smashing into each other is not that, like, it doesn't really happen in cinema, or it's not really that interesting. What's interesting is, coming up alongside, lowering the boarding ramps and
throwing the grapples
and everything. And the ramming part, like, didn't really do anything that big
Well,
way, and it's just like one more subsystem that could get cut.
I mean, as I understand it, in reality, ships that rammed other ships were designed to ram. Like, it was a very specific thing. You built a ship capable of ramming.
Like those ancient galleys that are powered by like hundreds of dudes, and they
like the Romans and whatnot. Whereas, like Age of Sail sailing ships like these, you didn't ram people.
Yeah, because that way it would be a case where it's like, okay, sure, I can pull this strange, like, we'll call it attack sort of hairpin, but really what that is some representation of me just getting close enough to run grapplings at you.
Yeah, because it's tricky because, of course, again, in reality, once two ships are sort of tied together in a boarding action, they more or less stay there until the boarding action
which is fine but boring.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not that.
Although, having said that, like, even if you halved the effectiveness of boarding actions, like 1 or 2 turns of boarding actions would probably result in a sunk ship, which means you do end up getting the cinema of like, well, it was there, they were lashed together until one sunk.
Yeah, you sort of want to just go like let's just have the boarding action in one massive card rather than like multiple rounds of another card. So I think that part's fine. I agree. The boarding is slightly odd. I feel like it's almost, if you get to within that distance of another ship, you then like do a little swing round, and there's a little lash together move, and then board, rather than if you have a ship that is specifically a ramming ship, there's like a whole other set of rules for like smashing through somebody, because it's like if you ram 2 wooden ships into each other, even if you take the other guy down, you're going down with him, because
and like your ship. It doesn't quite work with the templates, but it's basically the same as like, okay, I can make a move, and if I end within 1 inch, which is essentially this like very short thing, then I can make a little like consolidation move by just pushing them together.
Yeah, and so if you do sort of like, as you say, if you swing around like this, you go, well, what I'm doing is like that, and I'm having a little board. And that, I think, would be potentially more interesting with the resultant movement, because obviously, where you end in a move like this, the next move is a bit like you pass through each other. It's like you say, it's going back to the old Gaslands oddness. Whereas if every collision ends like this, it means that everybody can then move off again, because you're always faced like in parallel lines. And I would argue that at this point the movement is sort of even more interesting, to be like, can I bid low enough that he moves off first, and I can then follow back into him, or do whatever else it is I'm going to do. And that would also be interesting, because that's a point where a low movement card is very useful, because you don't want to be the first one moving off there. So that, I think that might be potentially more interesting.
And like, I put the collisions rules in because when you got objects moving around like this, you need collision rules. But actually, like, when we did it in practice, it just felt like I don't really see this. I don't really see this in my head cinema. This is not like how these ships are interacting. They're not moving fast enough. They're not.
I thought I was reassured by the fact that when I was here and you were there, we got back within a round of movement.
Yeah, that was good. Particularly because like I was in iron, so you had to do most of the work.
Yeah. But, well, once the wind's behind you and you can take the gentle and the long.
Yeah, you absolutely cream.
In an open area like this, unlike a Gaslands track, you can really shift with with those templates. They do move you pretty fast. It's just in normal Gaslands, you never get to touch like the long, realistically.
Twice in a row.
Yeah, it's certainly not multiple times. We're just like poof, 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 straight away.
And I had no idea how long the game needed to be, but we played 5 rounds, and that felt fine. Like,
I mean, 5 rounds actually finished the game out.
Yeah,
it's not that it felt fine. It was like genuinely concluded.
But and what I mean by that as well is like, I just guessed how many damage boxes to put on these. I just guessed how many damage dice to throw. But like, I'm not too sad about the numbers. I was disheartened by that initial like your ship getting sunk in 1 round.
Yeah.
Which I think that still can happen. Like if
Well,
If both of our frigates had come together, it could have been a one.
but then it feels acceptable that two frigates against each other, and
Maybe one of them melts.
bidding massive cards and having like an overwhelming boarding action. That feels kind of okay. It was more the sort of the frigate got took down from untouched by a brig on a boarding action that was a bit like that feels not
Something's
right.
weird there.
But yeah, if you're boarding into a frigate or being boarded by a frigate, it feels like that is a legitimate thing to be terrifying. That is like, it feels like most ships boarded by a frigate are in serious trouble anyway. So I don't think that's a problem. And I think, the brig is now being in a position where if they've got good cards, they can do serious damage, but it's much, much more limited. And even, like I say, even if you've got a 14 with a brig boarding a frigate, a 7 and an 8 isn't a like freakishly high numbers for them to have in their hand, or a 6 and a 10 or whatever. I think if the bidded cards being of the same value, do they go to the suits?
No, because you never get to that point where you're comparing that. It's simply because you'd make a bid and then I'd either accept it or raise it.
But like if you bid 13 and then I bid 13, what does happen?
I can't bid 13. I have to raise.
Okay, so you can't just match somebody else's bid. So the king of spades in your hand doesn't, for example, give you an advantage over the king of clubs.
No, not at the moment.
Is there a reason why not?
I don't know.
Because it feels like the most value in spades being an additional tiebreaker. I know sometimes you might be like...
Well, because because I'm going for one of those bidding systems where you don't get to match the bid. You always have to bravado over it.
Yeah, I'm just... Is it more fun for someone to be... To go 13 and the other person to go 13 all of spades and have an extra bit of granularity, because lying with more detail has extra sort of psychology to it where and if the other guy, if guy's sitting there, because there was a point where I had one card and it was the king of spades and the ability to go, I've got the king of spades, and for the other person to have to go, well, what are the odds of that? Feels like that's actually a kind of a nice moment.
And it's interesting because the more detail that goes into that system, the more acceptable it is that it has a nuclear outcome.
And because if you just bid a number at first, so you say 13, and I can beat you by either naming just a higher number or a specific suit, and if previously you were 13 of spades, then I have to go to 14. But if you're just 13, I can go 13 of spades. And then if you're earlier on, you're going okay, well, I'm bidding 13 of spades. It makes it that much more do you though? The odds are that much lower. Are you allowed to check the discard pile?
I don't know. I mean, it's open information, but it's fiddly to allow people to do it.
It's because that's one of those ones that is always controversial, where it's I can just remember the cards. So do I just get an advantage if I can? If I'm remembering cards?
And my instinct would be don't check the discard pile because it's slows the game down. But equally, making it sort of mealy-mouthed, where it's now you have to remember them or write them all down, is equally there's no good answer to that.
No, I know, and this is one of those ones that comes up in Board Game Geek debates all the time, where people are no, if a thing has put your VP as you gain them into a little box, I say throw the box away or give everyone a piece of paper and a pen, because
it's the same.
Who is that advantaging? If you're playing competitively, and it is, at the very least, I would think that if you're playing this, you're going, I'm remembering the aces and the kings and the things that go through for that reason. But generally, I think, I think all things considered, I like it. I think it's kind of jolly, quicker moving than I was expecting, which is a good thing. I think the wind dial is a nice thing for like quickly and easily.
Yeah, and this was a bit of a punt, but I quite like the sailing and shooting deck combo. I think that's quite the way the initiative system works has got enough like moments in it, which is fun.
I think I would say that you can use shooting cards to pivot, whether you're in irons or not, just because there is a little point there where, but you've both got only shooting cards and you're both unable to like shoot each other, and you go, all right, well, there's 3 cards. There were points there where we were just like, well, I'll just throw these cards away, and that's never a good feeling. And if you could at least go, well, I'll spend this shooting card to pivot round a bit, and then this shooting card to actually get a shot on you.
I mean, I was looking for a repair mechanic. I was considering a repair mechanic, which is never an obvious choice, but having a couple of like red cards that you can't do anything with, and thus getting like 2 hull points back a turn, like it feels like, okay, I get something for them. It extends the game a tiny bit, but not really. Like 2 hull points just gives you a bit of confidence. It doesn't actually change the game phenomenally. I don't mind. I don't mind the idea of spinning on the spot either. Like that's a couple of like intriguing setting things. I just think it gives you a bit like when I ran in that direction off the table. That felt really good. Like that's the challenge of sailing. If I can just burn cards to spin on the spot, then it's a bit like, the challenge of sailing kind of evaporates at that point.
The issue with if you can spend cards to heal up, in relation to the point where I was here and you were there, what I would then have been doing was
7 cards. 7
shooting cards. This
shooting.
turn I heal. I assume you also heal. Right. Now let's restart with 2 completely fresh ships. It's like 1 hull box, returned doesn't significantly extend the game. When you've got 2 smashed up ships at other ends of the table, 7 hull boxes does extend the game.
Yeah, that's another 3 turns.
That because that's like fully back to fresh again.
But the point is good, which is when you've got shooting cards you can't use, is there something cool you can do with them rather than just having a. I mean, it's not the end of the world to just toss them in the bin and be like, oh, okay, right, new turn.
Yeah, it wasn't super significant at that point when we were at different ends, but there was a in the sort of mid game, there was a point where I pulled like 2 shooting cards, that didn't do anything. It just felt a bit like, yeah, this is the wrong moment to have the tempo drop.
I suppose the corollary of that is that like there is intended to be a spiciness in that decision about which cards you take, and taking the wrong cards, like I'm okay that there's a bit of a punishment for that. The question is that punishment that nothing happens and that something should happen instead, but the wrong something should happen?
Yeah, it's when the punishment is unfunness. You thought something spicy was going to happen. What's going to happen is you're going to sit there and think about what you did. That's always a sort of like,
because it could be that like it could be the brutalist version is, oh, you can't play your shooting, well I get to use your shooting card. Or it could be that like there's a possibility that powder explodes, or there's all kinds of things that could happen. I don't know what the right one is.
If you did that, I am only ramming. I'm only ever ramming. I'm not touching that text. Stick it.
That's true.
Because I can always use those guys.
Yeah.
The fact that occasionally those guys blow my face off, and the ramming is so, it's like there, red deck can go spin.
Well, actually, that's another possibility, is that these could be used as riders. So like if you've got some spare red cards, you make a move, you're like, I'm going to throw these 2 in for like a plus or minus 1 speed for each card I throw in, or something, which would give me like some flexibility to change what I'm doing, but it's not like I'm currently running downwind and then I'm currently reaching downwind and then I suddenly get to like spin on the spot.
I mean, that's potentially interesting insofar as a ship that is in irons then
could then make a move,
might use red cards. So what red cards are rowing?
Yeah, or like sticking some gas in the tank.
Sure, yeah, running the engine or getting the oars out, and they basically count you as being speed 1.
Well, yeah, because you could use them as plus or minus 1 speed each, and then
onto
so
a
you
move.
could get from in irons up to speed 2. Well, you don't need to get speed 1 actually.
Yeah, you only need speed 1 because you can at least then a hairpin is always going to get you out of irons.
Right, and then you can get from beating into like a medium straight.
Yeah,
with a single
potentially
card.
if you want.
Yeah, no, that's good. But
I think it's more the sort of in irons save move because.
Well, no, it's also like, if I'm reaching, burning 2 shooting cards to be able to take a 90-degree turn or a hairpin, that's actually that would have been pretty massive.
Yeah, sort of dropping a little bit of an
So
anchor.
in that one situation, the -2 is brilliant.
Yeah, sort of.
And actually, even if I'm beating, and actually what I want to do is spin on the spot so I can get a bead on you, like -2 on that, so I'm in irons, and now I'm spinning on the spot. So then you get the spinning on the spot, but it's emergent from the plus or minus 1.
Yeah, potentially, yeah. So that could be an interesting option.
And then there's extra reason to draw them because they give you flexibility in the sailing. And there's extra, like, they're winking at you earlier in the turn, going like, "Ooh, I could be doing something cool for you." And then you're like, "No, I want you for shooting later on."
Yeah.
So yeah, that's all good. That's all good.
Yeah, lovely.
Jolly. So it's disappointing that the Rad Pirates of the Toxic Seas, or maybe the Rad Pirates of the Toxic Sands, there's nothing about the Toxic Sands yet. Like all of those ideas about like putting traps down and stuff, like they were cool ideas, haven't had the time to like... They're much more complicated, and also I didn't like the visuals of like this stuff being scattered everywhere.
I think that one of the things that's interesting about the One Box Challenge generally is how many of the games have sort of looked at and gone, that's expandable. There's some that have gone like, I'm gonna do the whole thing. It's a bit like, I think maybe there's an overreach there. The ones I find more interesting are like, I'm doing the core thing, but look at where this could go. And this is, this again is one where it's like, you could have like a range of ships and forces. You could have the sands doing something, and that could be a whole like...
Yeah, I mean, I'm already thinking like, this is the sand, this is like the Sahara Mediterranean. Like there's an Arctic one where you're like going across the ice fields. Like there's a sludgy, like radioactive sea one where you're like, like giant sort of dirt junk piles and radioactive sludge, and you're going through that. Like, the other thing is that this is cool because I'm on like my 15th iteration of an activation system for Junk Space, the like X-Wing spaceship dueling game. And this is the best that I've got to of these kinds of things. So it's quite likely that I'll end up pulling this engine out of here and putting it into Junk Space because what this is doing is it's giving an X-Wing-like kind of movement programming thing with a little bit of spice to it. And because of the way that the cards work, it would be well easy enough to have like detailed modifiers where like as my pilot or captain gains experience, they get a plus or a minus on the initiatives, and now I can, a high card is worth more to me.
I mean, inherently, like there's a million things you can do with deck manipulation, isn't there? It's like you can have a pilot skill where he can look at 2 cards off of the deck and take one of them, where he can pull a card out of the discard pile. Maybe he could, trash cards out of the whole thing, and now nobody can have them.
So this system came out of the fact that, as we were talking about, I wanted to explore doing this as a deck builder, where like I had a little deck of 10 cards. And so like the obvious first solution was like, okay, well there are 6 sailing cards and 4 shooting cards. And then the just first thing that happens is you draw all shooting cards and 1 sailing card in your first hand. And you're like, well, this system doesn't work.
No, but I kind of like the idea of in-play deck build where you start off with a normal deck, and then there's like one guy is like a ramming specialist, and he has the ability at times to if he pulls a shooting card, trash it out of the deck, and might even like actually weaken everybody's shooting by some sort of like dampening field or something.
Yeah, so there's a lot of manipulation that can happen.
Yeah, I mean, there are many games built on deck manipulation mechanics, and like I say, being able to like you pull 9 cards and then discard 2 of them because of a certain pilot, or if you pull all black cards, you can do blah blah or blah blah.
And there's other things where using these as resources and being like, okay, well, I'm going to stash one under here. It might come back later, or when I do a thing, it's going to be like, haha, I get a double bonus on it, or whatever. It's a ton of fun to be had.
Broadside's Bart, who's like, if you pull all shooting cards, you can play them all at the same time on the first thing, and then go, that's it. I'm done for the round. My entire fleet is going broadsides, and then you do whatever you want to do if you're still left, and all that kind of insanity.
I think the other thing that's been fun about this challenge is this sort of setup with 2 identical small forces. This is how I tend to prototype anyway. And so all it's done is it's sort of said, and don't bother writing any of the faction or list building thing. You just get this. We don't have to worry about that. That's the shtick.
Yeah, and for me, I think that's one of the things that's really interesting about it as a design challenge, because one of the things that's an easy temptation, particularly for new designers, is to go here's an okay system. Now I'm going to write factions. Oh, the factions are so much fun, and they do all these different things, they synergize. And I like seeing this where it's pushing people to go, the units are kind of basic. Let's get a core system that really sings, because I think that's a better thing to do in design. And once the core system sings, then start mucking about a bit with factions.
100%.
It's big, fully released, full-on war games. A number of times I pick them up, and the rules are just meh, and all of the interest is in the faction system. My attitudes are very much I have no interest in your game then.
Yeah, because ultimately the system is the foundation, and all of this other stuff's just content. It's kind of optional. You need that, for me at least. The whole foundation, the structure on which it's sitting needs to be endlessly enjoyable to interact with, and then the content will be even more spices and sugar and syrup on top of that.
When all the juice is in the faction system, it asks for homework from the player before they can enjoy themselves, and it always pushes you into that risk of, well, I'm only allowed to take some of the fun things, because the fun things are in the faction. I'm limited by that. The fun thing is not the main engine, which I'm going to experience all of. I have to pick my fun things, and maybe I made the wrong choice and I missed out on one of the funnest things.
Yeah, and you're right.
They're only an option.
You're right that the most interesting thing that comes of not having any variety in the models is that, okay, well, I have to make the core engine fun. This bicycle has to be fun to ride.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And there's, I've been impressed by so many of the games that have just gone well, here's a fun core engine. There are no difference in the factions, but that's it's almost an out for a designer making fun faction systems, because you can sort of get yourself out of trouble by doing weird things in the factions, and the ability to go no, the core engine, the things that everyone can do are inherently fun for everybody to do, is that much harder, and I think makes that much more of an interesting game.
I agree. You know what? It's just occurred to me. If I put this as a battle report on the Rule of Carnage YouTube channel, it might be the first time you've beaten me on camera, which is weird. But it's only right and proper that it be at my own game.
Is that why it won't now turn up as a battle report?
Oh, this is a technical issue.